being a great dad, being a great husband or partner, having a business, having a job, trying to keep your own sanity. All of those in their own are their own worthy foe. And it seems like men are not the expectations, but I think we have aspirations of putting it all together for ourselves, which I don't think there's been too many models of that before, or things that, people that we can look to say like, oh, they had it all figured out. Because it seems like the people who we thought had it all figured out maybe didn't actually.
Yeah, totally. There's a lot of balls to juggle, a lot of things to do. And I didn't want to come off too negative there. I tried to view all those things as challenges and great things that I have in my life. I wouldn't ask for anything different, right? I'm at a good spot and I enjoy my business and my career as an engineer. I love my kids and my wife. And so although there are things to be dealt with, they're exciting and the future's bright. So
yeah, I think one of the things that we've talked about is going up the ladders of manhood. And it seems that, big life events tend to be the catalyst for those things, whether it's having a kid or starting a business or getting married or whatever it may be. And that this is what we asked for, this is what we wanted. And I think that so many times we end up getting exactly what we wanted. And in that moment, can we choose to be grateful or to sort of damn it, and I'm like you and try and remember that. But I think it can be a challenge sometimes when you're in the middle of it to remind yourself like, no, these are the good old days. I just don't know it yet.
Yeah, totally. You reminded me of an experience I had with my own family and my kids about over 11 years ago now, because my son's 11. I wrote a children's book and I wrote it for my unborn son. My wife was pregnant at the time. And I wanted to pass on some of life lessons, things that I'd learned from my own experience that I could teach him and like distill it into this book. So I wrote it for him, self-published it. It was just kind of a passion project, a family project for a while. We kept it within the family. We never put it up on Amazon or anything like that. And eventually we did, like 10 years later. So I think it was almost 2 years ago now, we self-published it on Amazon. But the premise of the story was about this ladder or different experience in life of becoming a man step by step. And the story was about us having our first child and how our life was going to be turned upside down completely. We knew that from the outside looking in, but we'd never gone through that experience. And again, I wrote that book about that, going from just the two of us to having a kid, but it was written from the perspective of our dog. And so his life was great with us, right? Just the three of us. And then all of a sudden there's this kid that kind of took over all our time and attention, and he got kind of kicked to the curb. And long story short is he gained another friend, a fourth member of the family, and somebody that loves him dearly. And so, yeah, I think we know what we're signing up for to an extent before we get to that next ladder or that next step. But a lot of it's unknown, right? It's a little scary and you don't really know what you're signing up for until you get there. And that could be fatherhood, that could be getting married, that could be starting a business, that could be your career. Like I signed up to be an engineer when I was in college. I had no idea what that meant in reality, right? What responsibilities I was going to have and how that was all going to pan out. And so we have to have a little bit of faith when we make those decisions and just trust that we're headed in the right direction and course correct as we go.
Yeah, one of the things that I'm wrestling with sort of as a dad and a father, and most of the listeners know this, but to catch you up, I'm what I call like a solo dad, because I'm not like technically a single dad. They still see their mom occasionally, but most of the time it's all on me. And that is a unique opportunity and also like the biggest challenge of my life, because again, it's if I just had to be a stay-at-home dad, cool, like that's one thing. I think like that there's a funny meme on X going around where like guys are saying like the stay-at-home part is actually the easiest part. Like they're like, we get to do this. We don't know what everyone's been complaining about. This is the easy. And the difference is that when you have to do both, right? When you have to be the caretaker and the provider at the same time, like that's just an interesting challenge. And don't get me wrong, stay-at-home moms, they have their own unique challenges and they have their mental load to bear and deal with. And I'm not downplaying any of that. But recently I've realized that like I am growing up with my kids, right? You sort of you hear that sometimes we're like, oh, I was when you have a young parent, it's like I was growing up and I see all these things where I'm sort of forcing myself to have to learn on the fly because of the situations. And there's also so many things that I'm like, not wanting to pass down either, in terms of my mindset or poor habits or whatever it is, right? My like, candy addiction or like all those sorts of things that like for me growing up, it was one thing if you're just responsible for yourself, but where all of a sudden your choices are making clear impacts on other human beings. I think it's just an interesting responsibility that sort of forces you to wake up and grow up a lot faster.
Yeah, I've had that same experience. My 4-year-old daughter asked me, I think it was yesterday, she goes, Dad, what are you going to do when you grow up? And I just thought it was so funny. I've heard that phraseology before, but it came from her mouth. I don't know where she heard that or why she thought that. But at 4 years old, and I turn 40 next month. And so she goes, Dad, what are you going to do when you grow up? And I really thought about it for a while. I was like, man, it's almost like sky's the limit. There's the things I've done in the past professionally and also within my family and hobbies that I've had. And those are all great. I don't want to burn any of that down or start over per se, but I can build on top of that and do whatever it is that I want to do. So I love that idea that we kind of grow up with our kids. And I think looking back as well at our own parents, for me at least, that gives me a lot of empathy for my own parents, right? Because I'm like, man, as a kid, you just idolize your parents and you put them on a pedestal and you look at them as like they have life figured out. And then you become a parent and you're like, oh, they were just treading water trying to stay afloat. They were trying to figure it out as they went, and they grew up with us and we're growing up with our kids. And so it's a pattern that repeats itself. But I think we learn a lot from being parents and being fathers. And I'm super grateful for that experience.
Yeah. My son, it's like we're going through this interesting phase because you have that phase where like you're a superhero. And then all of a sudden he beats you at tetherball one time and you're like, and you were like, actually, you weren't like sandbagging totally, but you're like, sure. You actually, he beats you that one time and he like laughed. And I was like, man, okay, well, this is an interesting experience just because internally, like we see all of our flaws. And this is just like, there's that imposter syndrome that people deal with or whatever, like self-worth, like we know ourselves the most, right? And so we don't oftentimes give ourselves enough credit or the same credit that other people do. And I think that same thing can happen as a parent where our kids, they sort of have this idolized view of us. And I think that's fantastic. And I also like, I see it sometimes and I'm like, it sort of highlights the deficits, right? It kind of shows me where I'm not fully super, hero and actually flawed, right? And which is sort of scary because it's like, I think just reconciling those two things where, we're fully responsible for these human beings and we are sort of flawed individuals. At least for me, like I go through moments of like worry and doubt, I guess is probably the biggest thing that sort of emerges out of that is like, am I capable of pulling this off? And sort of faith kicks in, but it's sometimes it takes a while.
Yeah, as your kids get older, I've had this experience. It's not a fun one, but talking about, your kids kind of shedding light on what you do as a parent and you're under a microscope a little bit. The worst feeling is when your kid does something that's not great and you realize that it is something that they learned from you. The other day, one of my sons, I forget which one, he was yelling at his sister and did something to her that was kind of rude or mean. And just the way he did it kind of mimicked how I am sometimes. I'm not always that way. I feel like I'm pretty easygoing and pretty joyful and happy and nice to my kids. But, we do model some of those imperfections sometimes and they pick up on those things. And so it made me think, I've got to be better at modeling the kind of person that I want them to become and just be a little more aware of how I show up with my kids so that they can have the best model possible going forward. Me and my wife are going to take like a weekend trip next weekend. We're just going to go, I think it's just one night because we can only get away for one night. And we're going to go without the kids. We don't do this very often. And we're going to go to dinner and, all the fun things, maybe go see a show or something. But we're also going to spend time talking about our kids and our family and what we're doing right. And then maybe some things that we can improve on. And so, yeah, we're all a work in progress, but kids definitely shine a light on those areas that we need more improvement, perhaps.